What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. So it has been brought to my attention in a handful of DMs that nobody has any idea how to properly pronounce my name. A handful of people hoping to meet me at CrimeCon in the next couple of weeks did not want to come and say hello and then pronounce my name wrong. And I realized that in the entirety of my YouTube channel, so for over 4 years now, I have not once come on to my video and introduced myself saying my own name out loud. So just to clear the air, my name is not, in fact, Danelle. You pronounce it Danielle, as if there was an I in it. So today we are going to be speaking about a 15-year-old murder of a young woman named Anita Knutson. Now, Anita was only 18 years old and a freshman in college when she had her life taken from her in her own apartment in Minot, North Dakota. For years, police have heavily investigated this case. They have taken so many samples of DNA. There have been so many potential persons of interest, lots of rumors going around, but it wasn't until a little over a week ago that there was finally an arrest in this case. And it's partially in thanks to Cold Justice, which is also, hands down, one of my favorite true crime shows. Thanks to Kelly Siegler and Cold Justice, they were able to get some movement in the case, and there was an arrest. However, the individual that was arrested for the murder of Anita Knutson was able to get out on bond the following day. And the problem a lot of people have with this is that this individual has a history of bail jumping. So I wanted to make sure I made this video to not just raise awareness about Anita Knutson and the fact that this individual has a history of running away from their legal problems. Also, Minot Police are still trying to gather the strongest case they possibly can. This has been 15 years in waiting, and they want to make sure they have everything possible to hopefully get a conviction. So they are still encouraging anyone with any information to come forward and hand it over to them. But before I get into the details of the case, I want to say a huge thank you to Audible for partnering with me on today's video. Audible is the leading provider, hands down, of spoken word entertainment. Everything from audiobooks to Audible originals, podcasts, guided meditation, guided fitness, and more genres than you can imagine. So there is something for everyone to enjoy in all walks of life. Audible is also very easy to use. You can listen anytime, anywhere, with all of your favorite content easily accessible in one place. So whether you need some quick inspiration or you just need to wind down, Audible has you covered. Members also have a ton of perks. You get to choose one title every single month that you get to keep forever, and you also have full access to a pretty awesome growing selection of audiobooks, originals, and more. Now, I just finished Shiver by Ali Reynolds. It's her debut. I was blown away. This is the first time ever that I have not been able to guess how things are going to end. And that's pretty difficult for me, especially when it comes to true crime. Anything, I can usually guess what's about to happen. This audiobook had me on the edge of my seat at every single moment. Shiver is about the mysterious disappearance of a competitive snowboarder, and 10 years after her disappearance, her group of friends that had been with her that winter returned to the ski resort she vanished from, thinking that they were having just some kind of reunion. But when they got there, the resort was completely deserted, and they realized that they're stranded at the top of this glacier, and clearly someone is trying to get secrets out of them to get to the bottom of what happened to their friend 10 years prior. It flip-flops the entire time between the past and the present, so you never really have everything laid out in front of you at one time. You spend the entire audiobook kind of adding layers to the information that you do know, so it really keeps the secret of what's going on, and you don't figure out what's happening until the very end. I've tried to convince absolutely everyone I know to listen to this audiobook, so I really hope you guys will give it a shot. If you want to go ahead and check out Shiver and let me know what you think about it, or if it's not your thing and you want to check out some other titles, all you have to do is go to audible.com/Danielle or text code Danielle to 500 and you will get one free audiobook, which could be Shiver. I'm not being pushy, I'm just saying it's fantastic, and a 30-day free trial plus access to their Plus catalog. Thank you again to Audible for supporting my channel and in turn these victims in the cases that I speak on. So now to get into the details. Anita was adopted by Gordon and Sharon Knutson when she was only 5 months old. They had children of their own that had already grown up and moved away, but they felt they still had more room for love in their hearts, so they welcomed Anita into their home. And shortly after Anita, they welcomed her brother Daniel, and then shortly after that, her sister Anna. And they all were raised together as this inseparable family. Anna states that she had always looked up to Anita. Anita had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the world when she was with you. She said that Anita was hands down the nicest person that she ever knew. She didn't have a mean bone in her body. She genuinely just cared about everyone. With a smile that was always on her face and this radiant personality, she drew people into her like a magnet. She was always incredibly popular through all of her childhood. She was always surrounded by people that absolutely adored her. Anita was known as being this kind person that always had your back no matter what. She was always the one that was there for her friends. She was always the one rooting for the underdog. She was also incredibly smart. She wrote and published her own book while in 8th grade, which is incredibly impressive. She participated in pretty much every extracurricular you could imagine. She played the violin, she played the piano, she was in sports such as soccer. She loved to sing, she loved to write, she loved to read. The older she got, the more excited she was for her future. So it came as absolutely no surprise when Anita decided to move away to attend Minot State University. She had lived in Butte with her family and attended Velva High School, so Minot University was about an hour away from where the rest of her family was living. She didn't just want to go to college. This girl hit the ground running. Anita decided to pick up 2 part-time jobs. She worked at a clothing store in the local mall, and she also worked at a hotel. She did this so she could get her own apartment and be able to live off of campus. As soon as she started freshman year at Minot University, where she was studying elementary education, she moved into 2420 4th Street Northwest in apartment 5. It was just a small apartment complex close to the college. And Anita was living with one other person, a young woman named Nicole Rice. Anita was loving school. She was making all sorts of friends. Some of her friends had followed her from high school. She was making money. She had her own place. And she also wasn't very far away from her family. And this meant the world to her because Anita kept in constant communication with her family. When she wasn't physically with them, she at least spoke to them over the phone once a day, which is exactly why there was a massive alarm set up the first weekend of June in 2007. Sharon, Anita's mother, last spoke to her Friday, June 1st. When she spoke to Anita, Anita seemed completely fine. She was at a friend's house at the time and said she was about to leave and head back home to her apartment on 4th Street. But this was the last time that Sharon would ever speak to Anita. The following day, simply out of habit and the fact that they constantly were in communication, Sharon called Anita, but there was no response. Now, at first, this isn't a huge alarm. She's an 18-year-old young woman blossoming into her own. She also was working 2 jobs and had school. She was a busy individual, but usually if Anita didn't answer the phone, she at least called back in a reasonable amount of time. But Saturday came and went, and Anita never contacted her mom. That weekend, Anita's family was at a sports tournament for her brother Daniel. All of them were together, and they all have said in interviews that they kind of realized that none of them had heard from her that weekend, and that was definitely a little bit odd. So the following Sunday, the 3rd of June, Sharon again tried to contact Anita, but there was still no answer. And at this point, she felt like something was possibly going on. So she told Gordon that the following day, she wanted him to just drive down there and make sure everything was all right. That Monday, June 4th, 2007, Gordon made the hour-long drive to Minot, to the apartments on 4th, to check on Anita. When he arrived, he noticed that her car was parked just a few yards away from the entrance of her apartment, so I'm sure he genuinely believed that she was there. Everything was fine. She maybe was just busy that weekend. But when he went to knock on the door, there was no answer. Anita didn't answer. Her roommate didn't appear to be home. So he knocked again, and there was still nothing. And at this point, he became incredibly worried. So right away, Gordon went to find the leasing manager of the apartment complex to see if there was any way she could let him into Anita's apartment so that he could check on her. When he first approached the manager about unlocking Anita's door, she stated for obvious reasons that she couldn't just go and unlock someone's apartment for him. It's a safety issue. Pretty much every apartment or landlord has some sort of protocol they follow, unless it's the police that have some sort of welfare check or warrant. But while they were kind of having this conversation and Gordon was getting frustrated because he was trying to express something had to be wrong, a maintenance worker walked up and overheard their conversation. Now, this maintenance worker was also dating the leasing manager at the time. Maintenance worker, I'm assuming, overheard the apartment that Gordon was trying to get into and said that he saw something kind of strange at the apartment earlier that morning. When he was doing his rounds, as maintenance workers typically do, he noticed that the window screen out of one of the windows on that particular apartment was down on the ground and had a pretty obvious slit cut into it. At this point, Gordon panicked. Gordon, the leasing manager, and the maintenance man all rushed over to Anita's apartment, and Gordon was able to see that the particular window screen that the maintenance man had seen came directly from Anita's bedroom window. And when he took a closer look, he realized that Anita's bedroom window itself was also open. When he peered inside, he saw Anita face down on the bed, and in his gut immediately knew that she was no longer alive. Because the window was open, he reached his hand in and laid it on her. She was cold to the touch, and this is when panic really set in for everyone. The leasing manager obviously said screw it and unlocked the door for Gordon, and they all rushed in there. She called 911 at 5:12 p.m. that day on June 4th, 2007, and Gordon rushed to his daughter's room where he found her face down on a blood-soaked mattress covered up in a robe. When authorities arrived on scene, based on the screen that was found out of the window, the way that it was cut open, the fact that her window itself was open, it really suggested initially that this was a burglary possibly gone wrong. And because the door had been locked when the leasing manager and Gordon had gone to try to get into it, it indicated that the window itself was likely the point of entry. But when they started taking a closer look at the crime scene, nothing was adding up. There was no sign at all of a struggle within the apartment, and all of Anita's items of value were still sitting there out in the open. Anita had a laptop. She had a purse that had cash in it. Her phone was sitting out, her digital camera. All of these things were clearly in view to anyone who would have come into the apartment, or at least her bedroom at the time, but not a single one of them appeared disturbed at all. Anita was also laying face down, but they were able to determine that she had likely died from stab wounds to the chest, which made it possible that someone had potentially moved her body after killing her. There were also no obvious signs that sexual assault had potentially been the motive, and interestingly, the murder weapon had been left behind. Now, there's a lot of different reports on this particular case all over the internet. Some of them say that the knife was found in the kitchen sink, some say the bathroom sink, some just say a sink in general, but from all of the affidavits and things that I've been able to read, the knife was actually found towards the base of her bed near the window where it's assumed someone came in and out of the apartment. The knife itself was just a simple small pocket knife. They have stated that the knife was in fact covered in blood and dirt. A little kitty purring ASMR for you guys real quick. He always wants to sit with me when I film. Can you say hi real quick? Can you give everyone a kitty break? A little break from all of the scary things we're talking about? He is so cute. Then when they looked at the window screen, they noticed that right along the area where the screen had been cut open by a knife, there was blood, indicating that the window screen wasn't even messed with until after the murder. On top of that, when they looked below the window where someone presumably gained access to the apartment, there was no sign at all of a disturbance. So it seems like whoever did this to Anita somehow gained access to her locked apartment, killed her, then covered her up and tried to stage it as a burglary, and then left the apartment through likely the front door and somehow locked it back behind them. The killer was probably someone who had some sort of connection with Anita or knew her. This was backed up even more by the fact that Anita had been covered by a robe, and I personally think that she was flipped over onto her stomach. Whoever did this had some sort of personal connection. They didn't want to look at her face. You typically see someone with a connection to the victim cover up their body. They don't want to see what they have done. Right away, police tried tried to figure out if Anita had any enemies, any boyfriends, ex-boyfriends, strange neighbors. And meanwhile, Anita's family was devastated. They could not think of a single person in the world that knew Anita that would ever want to harm her. That just didn't make sense. That was not the kind of person that knew Anita. If you knew Anita, you loved her. Sharon stated in an interview that when she went to adopt Anita, she had to agree to protect Anita and take care of her for the rest of her life. And she heartbrokenly said that she felt she had failed. It was one of the most difficult interviews that I have watched in a long time. Her siblings that looked up to her more than anything were absolutely shattered. But the family wasn't alone. The entire community, everyone that had ever had the pleasure of knowing Anita, was in pain. Friends of Anita and the family, and even just strangers, decided to begin grocery runs for the Knutson family. People wanted to do anything they could to give them one less thing to worry about. Everyone really banded together. The Lockevelva High School students also decided to get together and make pink bracelets in her honor. Everyone was so shaken. Anita was just not the kind of person that someone would go after. And because the entire scene pointed that it was someone that knew her, no one could wrap their head around this. And it made everyone feel like if Anita could be a target, anyone could be a target. Police began to question everyone possible. They spoke to Nicole Rice, who was Anita's roommate at the time, to try to get information, possibly a timeline. All of the evidence pointed to the fact that the killer likely had a key. And after police dug around, they found out that there were only 4 individuals that had a key to the apartment: the leasing manager, the maintenance man, Anita, and Nicole Rice. When police spoke to Nicole Rice, she had an alibi of sorts. According to Nicole, she had been staying with her parents across town the entire weekend. She hadn't heard from Anita. She hadn't seen Anita. She didn't go back to her apartment at all because she was across town. Nicole told police that she and Anita were best friends. They never had any issues at all. And it was just as shocking to her. This isn't a really rock solid alibi. Just because you're at your parents' house across town does not mean that it is impossible to go to the other side of town. But when police initially spoke to Nicole's parents, they both agreed that Nicole had been at their house all weekend. So at this point, police then started to look into one individual that, according to many that knew Anita, seemed a bit obsessive over her. Her high school prom date named Tyler. So according to interviews with family, Tyler was a bit of an oddball. It was very obvious to anyone around them that Tyler had a pretty big crush on Anita, but the feelings were not at all reciprocated. Anita had absolutely no interest in dating anyone at the time. She was just a real independent, do her own thing kind of person. But despite kind of brushing off Tyler multiple times romantically, Tyler still remained close to her. When Anita moved away to Minot University, moving into the apartments on 4th, interestingly, Tyler moved along with her. Tyler actually moved into the exact same apartment building. So you can see how a handful of people believed that this was a little bit suspect. And to top it off, when the entire apartment was roped off as a crime scene, Tyler was one of the very first ones standing just outside of the police tape. Police had started to speak to all of the different individuals that were watching all of this happen at the time. It was likely that they all lived at this apartment complex. They wanted to see if any of them knew Anita or if any of them had seen or heard anything strange. They had a pretty big interest in Tyler when he said that he did personally know Anita. And when they asked him the last time he spoke to her, he was able to tell them down to the exact minute, which to police seemed a little bit strange. They immediately took Tyler to a nearby van where they were able to privately question him. And according to Tyler, he was cooperative the entire time, and he was released after answering everything he could without any feelings at all that he was being looked at as a potential suspect or person of interest. Shortly after her death, he created a memorial Facebook page for her, and that seemed incredibly odd for him to do because according to other family members, they were friends, but they were not best friends or super close friends by any means. He also started to put out memorial videos on YouTube. While some people did just see this as a friend mourning the loss of someone close to them, A lot still questioned if he was possibly involved, because there are certain times where people will put themselves in the middle of investigations, which we'll get into by the end of this video. They are involved in it. So between all of this odd behavior, the fact that he lived in the apartment complex, Anita maybe would have let him in. Could that explain why the door was locked behind him? Did he somehow have a key? Did he somehow know how to lock the door without one? It would have been easy and quick for him to escape. No one would have questioned seeing him there. There were just a lot of different rumors and speculation going on at the time. But Tyler still continued to just brush all of this off. He stated in interviews that he only knew the exact time that he spoke to Anita last because while he was standing there at the crime scene trying to wrap his head around what was going on, Anita's aunt approached him, recognizing him, knowing this was someone that Anita spoke to. And she specifically asked Tyler when the last time he spoke to Anita was. And in an attempt to be as helpful as possible, he went all the way back to his apartment that he shared with his brother and looked up through all of his logs the exact last time he spoke to Anita and handed this over to her aunt. Then obviously when police come around asking him this question, he was able to easily answer, still hoping to help out the investigation. He also was gathering as much information as possible through the Facebook page. Any tips that were coming in, he did in fact pass them along to authorities. Authorities corroborated this fact. According to Tyler, he was doing everything simply because he cared for Anita. According to Tyler, yeah, he did have a crush on Anita at one point, but he was very well aware that she did not feel the same way towards him. However, he still saw her as a great friend. He said that she was just an amazing individual, and he's not the only person that felt this way. Everyone was just drawn to Anita. He claimed that Anita was always very supportive and a good friend of him in high school, and then when they both went on to attend Minot State University, majority of his friends went off to different colleges. So he said that at this point, she was pretty much the only person that he had. If the tables had been turned, Anita would have done the same thing for anyone else. So he simply wanted to do whatever he could for her. So at this point, a lot of the focus kind of turned away from Tyler, and around the same time, police received a tip that seemed very promising. Someone reported seeing a man running away from the direction of Anita's apartment the morning that she was thought to have been killed. Police immediately decided to sit down with this individual and create a composite sketch. They wanted to get some sort of image of this man out to the media as soon as possible so they would be able to find him and question him. Shockingly, right away, this man himself came in and said, you have a drawing of me out there and I can explain. This individual stated that he had absolutely nothing to do with Anita's murder. He said this was just all one big misunderstanding. According to this individual, he frequently went out on morning jogs. He took the exact same route at the exact same time, and he just so happened to be seen by someone that morning who thought this was suspicious. After authorities looked into all of this information and did confirm this was his typical route, this was something he normally did, they were able to clear him. But this also meant that they were all the way back to square one. Police continued to interview all of Anita's friends, all of her family, anyone that ever had come into contact with her. They made sure to interview every single person at the apartment complex, meaning that they interviewed Tyler for a second time. And during all of this, they started to gather everyone's DNA, including Tyler's DNA, because during their forensic testing, they managed to find someone else's DNA at the crime scene, which meant they could have the killer's DNA. And because they believed it was someone close to her, if they got DNA from all of those individuals, they felt like they could crack the case. While all of this was going on, the investigation was going on in the background, Anita's family was still dealing with her death. Her funeral was held on June 11th at Oak Valley Lutheran Church, but so many people wanted to attend to pay their respects and show their love and support to Anita's family that they had to open up the high school gym so that people could go there and participate because not everyone could fit inside of the church. But the day of the funeral, something else a little bit odd happened. Nicole Rice's mother allegedly showed up to the funeral, and it didn't seem like she was there to pay her respects. She instead got into a verbal altercation, at least a one-sided one, with Anita's mom. She was yelling at Anita's mom, incredibly upset that her daughter, Nicole, had been questioned by police. This is shocking on quite a handful of levels. First and foremost, Anita's funeral, of all places, you're going to come and start screaming at grieving parents. I don't think that's a very good decision to make. Second of all, everyone possible was being interviewed. People had been interviewed numerous times. People that went to high school with Anita and hadn't seen her in a while. I mean, everyone possible. All people to be questioned and to be interviewed. The first obvious person would be the person closest to her physically, which would have been Nicole, her roommate. It just felt super off and weird that she was so up in arms about her daughter being questioned. There is nothing odd at all about that. It is just common practice during these investigations. At this point, police seem to be grasping at straws. They questioned a group of construction workers that had been doing work across the street from Anita's apartment. I have also seen they potentially were also working at Anita's apartment complex itself. They believed it was possible that someone had been watching her, maybe saw some sort of interest in her, and being transient day workers, which most of them were, it would have been very easy to attack her and fade away with nobody having any idea that they had even been there to begin with. Most of the different construction workers did cooperate fully with police. They answered any questions. They offered up their DNA. Obviously, some of them were not comfortable with this at all because there was really no reasoning to suspect they did anything, so some of them did say no. And there was also a good chunk of individuals that were these transient day workers. There was no way to identify or find any of them, so they questioned who they could, but ultimately this all seemed to lead absolutely nowhere. And then the attention turned to the maintenance worker at Anita's apartment. After all, this maintenance worker was one of 4 that had a key to the apartment, which means it would have been very easy to gain access, lock the door behind them. He conveniently happened to find that cut up window screen that morning, and then he just so happens to walk in and know exactly what everyone's talking about when Gordon was confronting the leasing manager. You can see how this rumor and theory kind of tumbled and created this life of its own. So police thoroughly questioned this man. Thoroughly, along with the leasing manager. I mean, there were rumors that the leasing manager and this maintenance man were somehow in on this together because they were dating, but authorities stated that they felt very confident that he had absolutely nothing to do with it. I will state that a year after the murder of Anita, he did end his own life, and this made a lot of people suspicious that he did it because he was guilty of something, but police have still maintained the fact that that is an entirely unrelated incident. The one person that continuously came up in tips and interviews, I mean over and over and over again, was Nicole Rice. While Nicole had told police that she and Anita were best friends, everyone else said the exact opposite. According to everyone that knew Anita that was questioned by police, she never had issues with anyone except Nicole. While roommates do have a tendency to bicker, what was going on between Anita and Nicole was way, way, way past that. According to Sharon, Anita's mother, Anita had so many complaints when it came to Nicole. Nicole was always arguing with her about something. She was always putting Anita in unsafe positions. Nicole would apparently have men over very frequently to the apartment, which in itself, that's not an issue. But the issue was the fact that these strange men, all different ones, would come over to the apartment and Nicole would leave them there alone. So put yourself in Anita's shoes. You already are not sure of your roommate. You're moved out and in your own apartment for the very first time. And you walk into your apartment at night after work, a long late shift, and there is just a strange man in your apartment. Your roommate's nowhere to be found. You have no clue who this person is. Anita even confided in her mother that Nicole had been sending her very threatening text messages. While Sharon stated that she never personally saw any of these text messages, we have no clue at all what any of them said. I'm sure authorities do at this point. They probably got all of her phone records. Whatever it was that Nicole was saying to Anita was enough for her to feel scared for her life, you guys. That is a lot, to the point that Anita told her mom she was moving out. She wanted to be out of that apartment as soon as humanly possible. When police dug deeper, there was just witness after witness after witness that corroborated the fact that Nicole and Anita were always arguing about something. They were able to find at least one incident where things did in fact become physical. Nicole, for some reason, slammed Anita's foot in a door. So at this point, police took a DNA swab from Nicole. She did willingly hand this over, hoping that if she did somehow have anything to do with this murder, that the DNA would connect her. I'm assuming that means they have DNA from the murder weapon itself, because otherwise it's going to be a little difficult to prove, being her roommate, that her DNA didn't just end up there because she lives there. But at this point, it was all kind of just a waiting game. Upon looking into Anita's phone records and social media activity, police were able to determine that it was very likely she had been killed in the early morning hours of Sunday the 3rd. She had replied to a text at 4:48 a.m. that morning, and she received another text afterwards at 4:53 a.m. However, that text at 4:53 she never read, and there was no more activity on her phone past that point. So 4:48 a.m., after that, something happened to Anita. However, there has been a lot of question and speculation, and I'm hoping this comes out in the trial, that possibly something happened earlier than this. After all, she didn't show up to work that Saturday, the 2nd of June, and that was not at all like Anita. Anita was a very responsible person. She was reliable. If she wasn't coming into work, she at least would have called first. So some people believe it's possible something was going on that Saturday, and that maybe it wasn't even her using her phone that Sunday. She also didn't answer the phone call from her mom that Saturday. She would have called her back had she had the ability to. So I feel like it's very possible that that entire weekend she was with her killer. The report from the medical examiner stated that Anita had been stabbed 2 times in the chest, but only one of those stab wounds was fatal, and she just bled to death. There was no sign of sexual assault that they could find during the exam, so this motive, whatever it was, seemed like a very personal one. But unfortunately, years passed and nothing happened. There had been another attack on a woman on Minot campus a month after Anita's death, and this also sent another huge shockwave through particularly the college community. At this point, many people began to wonder if there was potentially a serial killer out there. Is there someone targeting these young women specifically on this university's campus? But police stated that they were very confident these 2 incidents were completely unrelated. Regardless, huge props to Minot University. They decided to ramp up their security anyways in an attempt to protect all of their students. They installed all new lighting and all new security cameras in all of their parking lots. They also began conversations about an alert system that would immediately send these alerts out to students' phones and laptops. Everyone in Minot just felt very uneasy. After years of no answers, the Knutson family felt like they weren't sure if they were ever going to get justice, and they stated on a handful of interviews that they weren't sure anymore that police were doing everything that they could to find Anita's killer. But they refused to give up. 12 years after Anita's murder, funds were raised to have digital billboards put up at the local state fair. They wanted to make sure everyone knew there was a reward out there for information that would lead to the arrest of Anita's killer, and also to remind everyone that her killer had still not been found. Her case was still unsolved. They also created a petition, which was really awesome, and this was only created a few years back from my understanding, that demanded authorities to reach out for help. The petition specifically asked Minot Police to contact the media, namely Cold Justice. The hope was that the coverage would at the very least get eyes back on Anita's case, but mainly so that the authorities in Minot would have resources that they otherwise did not have access to, and hopefully an answer would be found. Over 1,000 people signed this petition, and when it was presented to the police department, they did not hesitate. They were more than happy to accept it. I think based on what is said later on by the chief at the time, I think they knew that they needed help. Deep down, they knew they just did not have the resources to solve this case alone. So Cold Justice ended up thankfully accepting the plea for help. I've tried to look for the exact episode, but I don't even think it's aired yet. I think it's going to air. So if I manage to nail down a date or anything, I'll make sure to put it in the description box down below. I'll also probably update you in a future video. But they accepted the plea for help, and between their resources and 2 new detectives that were working on the case, so much progress was made. It is so inspiring to me and just makes my heart absolutely sing that this family was able to have cold justice look into their case. I feel like the work that Kelly Siegler does, everyone on the team for cold justice, I mean, imagine these families have gone so long without answers, and they are just screaming for help and for someone to sit down and listen. And without fail, Kelly Siegler sits down with them and she does listen, and she takes the time to remind these families that have felt alone for decades that there are still people out there that care. There are still people that want to listen, and she will do everything in her power to solve this case. And thankfully, that is exactly what ended up happening. With the teamwork between Cold Justice and these new investigators, they were able to get an arrest warrant.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank everybody for being here on short notice. So, on June 4th, 2007, 19-year-old Anita Knutson was found murdered in her apartment in Northwest Minot. Now, after nearly 15 years of investigating and following up on leads, and the suspect is in custody. At about 3:25 p.m., 34-year-old Nicole Rice was arrested for murder and taken to Ward County Jail. Although most of the detectives who worked the original scene and investigation have retired, we have not forgotten about this case. Detective Carmen Asham and McKaylee Talbot were assigned to take over as the lead investigators. We tried to actively investigate Anita's case for the past few years, and finally, with the help of Cold Justice, we were able to move forward and regain focus. Due to the resources, logistics, planning, and experts they were able to provide, we were able to obtain an arrest warrant for Nicole Rice. I would like to thank everyone, especially Detective Asham and Detective Talbot, for their hard work and dedication to the investigation, and Captain Dale Plesses for his efforts to assist in coordinating all of the moving parts over the past week. I must also thank the rest of the officers, the staff, and everybody else at the Minot Police Department who has picked up the slack while everybody else has been busy working this case. Finally, my heart goes out to the family. I wish we could have solved this sooner, but at the same time, I'm glad to say that we have a person responsible for the murder of Anita Knutson in custody.
He admitted that in the past there had been multiple issues with staffing. There had been a lot of issues with getting resources. They just did not have what they needed to give this case the attention that was necessary to solve it. He also announced that Nicole had been a person of interest the entire time. They had always been looking into her. They always thought all the things that were happening and all of the tips that were coming in were very suspicious, but they just never had enough to arrest her. There was so much information and so many, bits and pieces and tips that had come in on this case that they needed someone to be able to sit down with them and lay everything out in a way that made sense and figure out what was going on. That is exactly what happened, which is what led to her arrest. They obviously did not want to arrest Nicole prematurely. All that's going to do is ruin a potential conviction, which means that she would never be able to be charged again. So they were patiently sitting back and waiting for the help that they needed. Now, I'm not sure what all they were able to kind of round up, any extra information that they got. Maybe they had other interviews, other tips that ended up coming in when Cold Justice did their investigation. But the affidavit of probable cause, which I will have a part of it linked down below, was released, and it has given kind of a few glimpses into the kinds of tips that had been coming in over the past 15 years. The affidavit says, quote, statements received from Nicole were inconsistent and contradicted each other. Statements by members of her family were also inconsistent. According to the affidavit, Nicole's father told Minot Police Department that Nicole had come over to their family home Saturday the 2nd at around 7 p.m. And he said that Nicole did not leave their house until the morning of Monday, June 4th. So according to Nicole's parents, the time in which police believed Anita was was murdered, they claim that there's no way Nicole was with them. However, a witness came forward stating that they very specifically saw Nicole at a bar in Russo the night of the 2nd, so that's Saturday, into the early morning hours of the 3rd. And according to this witness, Nicole specifically stated that after she left the bar, she was going back to her apartment in Minot to pick up a few pieces of clothing. This would place Nicole at the apartment around the time it's believed that Anita was murdered. The same witness told police that Nicole had mentioned multiple things about the crime scene that she should not have known unless she was at the crime scene herself. Many people had come forward stating that after Anita had died, Nicole would not even speak about her by her name. She would instead just call her profanities. So the story that she had tried to sell police that, oh, Anita's my best friend, we have no issues, I was just at my family's. The reality is that she wasn't. She was out at bars that weekend. She had admitted to someone that she was going back to her apartment that early Sunday morning, and she would not even refer to Anita by her own name after her death. While questioning friends, police found that, quote, Anita had a reputation for being kind, friendly, and likable. Nicole's reputation is that she was hot-tempered and reactionary. There was even one witness that came forward stating that they heard Nicole say, quote, one way or another, I'm going to get you out of this house, to Anita just prior to her murder. Now, there were a handful of individuals that stated that things had been smoothed over between Anita and Nicole just prior to her death, that they had kind of worked things out. But unfortunately, the only thing that I take away from that bit of information is that maybe Anita let too much of her guard down. Probably one of the most damning pieces of information that a witness brought forward was one that police had to work really hard to figure out. Someone had come forward with a tip, I'm assuming anonymously, that stated that Nicole had confessed to them that she had in fact been the one to kill Anita. After quite a bit of digging and research, they found that the person that brought this tip forward, the person that Nicole allegedly confessed to, was a guy that she had been dating in 2008 to 2009, so just a year after Anita's murder. According to this individual, they had been having a house party and Nicole became belligerently drunk. During this party, while Nicole was drunk, for some reason, the topic of Anita's murder was brought up. And Nicole said to her boyfriend, I did it. She confessed to killing Anita. Ex-boyfriend of hers was shocked by hearing this information and wanted to bring this up to Nicole while she was sober. But unfortunately, when he did this, she very angrily and aggressively shut him down. Not a positive thing was said by witnesses in regards to Nicole's feelings or actions towards Anita. At least nothing that I have seen released publicly ever supports that idea. Everything instead paints a picture that Nicole had it out for Anita for some reason. After sitting down and trying to, in my mind, figure out why on earth anyone would ever want to harm Anita, what could Nicole's motive have been? The only thing I can think of is jealousy. Everyone that spoke on Nicole said that she was just a rough individual. She was aggressive. She was blunt. She was all of these different things. Someone that could go off at any moment. But Anita, on the other hand, was loved by everyone. She was incredibly popular. She was gentle. She was kind. She was beautiful. She was always happy. And I think it's very possible that Nicole felt jealous of that. Nicole felt that Anita was something that she was not. And she was seeing the attention that it was getting Anita. Obviously, that's just my speculation, but I cannot think of any other reason that she would have had to want to harm her. The day after Nicole was arrested, she managed to bond out $120,000 cash, and honestly, this shocked quite a lot of people, including myself. Nicole had been charged for writing checks with insufficient funds back in 2012. She was bailed out, except Nicole ended up failing to appear in court. So she ended up being charged in December of 2012 with bail jumping because of this. So someone that has a history of skipping out on bail, someone that has sat silently for 15 years now, somehow was able to have bond at all, like that was an option. It's just absolutely wild to me. Judge
Nicole Rice, suspected of killing 18-year-old Anita Knutson in June 2007, has been placed on a corporate bond of $250,000 or a cash bond of $120,000.
Rice made her initial appearance in the courtroom today via television from the Ward County Jail. A nearly full courtroom heard the prosecution request a bond of $1 million in cash due to the nature of the crime. The defense countered with a request of $250,000, which the judge ordered. Rice's preliminary hearing will be held April 21st and will be followed by her pretrial conference June 29th.
Judge Richard Hager, who made that decision, stated that Nicole has significant ties to Minot, and because her family is there, and somehow that makes her less of a flight risk. I kind of understand where that's coming from. However, if she's willing to skip out on bail over charges as small as worthless checks, I just am really worried about what's going to happen now that she's being faced with murder charges. That just doesn't sit well with me. After everything that police have had to do, after every bit of effort that it took to even get this arrest to begin with, after all of the time that Anita's family has sat waiting for something like this to happen, it just doesn't sit well with me that she was just allowed to freely go out. Seeing her behavior, now knowing that she's been charged with the intentional murder of her roommate, seeing her behavior, knowing that, is upsetting. She had followed along the investigation the entire time, posting videos of new news coverage onto her personal Facebook. She followed the Facebook page that was created for Anita and would post things to it like, "I miss you," and things like that. Her mother even posted a now deleted post on Facebook that stated that she couldn't wait for someone to be finally arrested for this so that everyone could have some sort of relief. And Nicole had the nerve to reply to this, saying that it was so incredibly difficult being the person that everyone pointed a finger at, and that she was also a victim, that Anita was not the only victim, she was a victim as well. And the audacity behind that. And to me, that kind of supports this idea that she was struggling for attention when it came to Anita. She saw the attention Anita was getting, and she possibly wanted it, because even after Anita's death, she is still trying to push herself to the forefront, saying that, no, I'm a victim too. This whole thing just baffles me and is gut-wrenching, because I just do not understand how someone can look someone else in the eye and take their life, and afterwards, seeing what they've seen, knowing what they've done, they can just turn around, live their life like nothing ever happened. I've seen so many pictures, like smiling pictures of Nicole that she's posted afterwards. She went on to get married 2 times. She had a kid. She recently purchased like 6 acres of land and is so excited for all of her dreams to come true. And this is something she's wanted forever. The fact that this young woman who had beautiful dreams and was the brightest light in so many people's lives, all of that was taken from her. And then here is this individual that has somehow sat silent, like they are not responsible for anything for 15 years, and just has been enjoying life. I don't care how long I look into true crime, how many stories I go through, how many families I speak to. It's never going to shock me any less. And Nicole is right. Anita is not the only victim here in this murder, but the other victim is certainly not Nicole. It was Anita's brother, Daniel. On April 9th, 2013, Anita's brother, Daniel, ended his own life. Someone that was so social and happy. He loved sports. He had a great sense of humor. I think he was either homecoming king or prom king or something. He was equally as radiant and magnificent as Anita was. After his sister died, his family said his inner spark died right along with her. He wasn't happy anymore. He wasn't as social anymore. You know, this guy that you never saw without a smile on his face suddenly seemed sad and angry all the time. Sharon, his mother, said that you could just feel the anger coming off of him. His sister was his best friend, and when he lost her, he lost everything. He just couldn't take it anymore, and he ended his life. Anna, their sister, said, "Whoever killed my sister had a hand in also killing my brother." 2 beautiful souls taken. And for what? I am heartbroken for everyone that knew Anita, for everyone that knew and loved Daniel, for their whole family. Any of you can go online and read through articles. I obviously have all my sources linked down below. There's interviews, video interviews, and you can feel through these interviews all of the love that they have for each other. It is literally like a warm hug when you hear this family talk about each other. And I hope more than anything, they ultimately get the justice that they deserve, the justice that they've waited for, the justice that Anita has deserved this entire time. I am going to be keeping a very, very close eye on this case so that I can update you guys along the way. If there's ever any way that I hear of that you guys can all help the family, I will make sure to leave that down below. But on that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Anita's story. Her story deserves to be told. Who she was and the impact she made while on this earth deserves to be remembered. And that is all that I have for you guys today. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Helen fam, and I will see you guys in my next video.